So we're in After Effects. We're looking at the four parts of my animation. We've got verse 4 and verse 3. These don't really have that much perspective stuff going on. So it's not going to let me zoom out. Okay. These are fairly simple. It's just manipulating the model, making his arms do whatever. So each of these controls a different way his arm moves. Here, the perspective arm clips in right when his arm reaches that point. The characters themselves move and zoom in on the page. There's no 3D layers at all in this verse. Same with verse 4, but that pretty obvious. Jack Black just fucking explodes at the end. So there's nothing 3D in either of these two. Verse 1 and 2 have very intense 3D effects that I only really learned how to use over the weekend when I did this. As you can see, here's Steve, and this is, I mean, you've seen it, but take a look at it up close. So Steve is a compilation of PNGs into a quote unquote 3D model, sort of pseudo 3D model, if you will. If we take a close look here, he's literally just PNGs. Like, you can see his face through the top of his head, well, back of his head, top in this view, etc. Steve is built through developer tactics primarily, consisting of culling unneeded faces. The back of his head never faces the camera, so there's no need to have his head look at the camera. But if we do this, ooh, it does not like that. And then rotate his head. See, the back of his head is hollow. You can see his face through it. The only faces that are actually on Steve's head are his face, his sideburns, and his chin. Oh, and the top of his head is obviously. Everything about Steve's character is 3D in this. He does not have the bottoms of his feet. No. He does not have the bottoms of his feet. He just has hollow feet. Same with his arms. His arms are also hollow. His arms, please. Not his leg. His arms are also hollow. It's hard to tell with this one. They're solid on the bottom, but they're hollow on the top. You're never going to be seeing the top of Steve's arm long enough to realize that it's hollow. And even then, it just kind of works. Like here, it's plenty blue to make you think that it is the top of his arm. The way I did this is relatively simple, although the timeline does not show it justice. Each of these colors is a different segment of his body, so all these beige ones are Steve's head, as you can see. All of the green ones and these red ones are Steve's arms. The red one is the one that holds the block, and the block is actually a part of Steve's arm. We have Steve's legs in a group, and his other legs in a group, and then his body is all one piece. The only thing that isn't 3D in this is the background. So the background is just PNGs, frame by frame. These are made in Google Drawings prior to putting the assets into After Effects and animating them. The Steve model itself uses mostly parents and children to form the model. So if I grab Steve here, and you can see his face, I can't grab his face though. Notice how if I move the top of his head or anything that isn't his front face, it moves on its own and does not move the head. But if I grab the face, I can actually rotate his entire head. This is because Steve's head, well, the parts of his head, are controlled by the quote-unquote face here. Every single layer that isn't his face has the parent of Steve face. So Steve face is linked to this arm, since this arm does not do anything. So if I do this, his entire model will that. And the arm is the controller for the rest of the entire model. The block is parented to the arm. So the block is the child of the arm, our left arm. And everything else from there is parented to this arm, as we saw earlier. And it's just simply animated from memory of how the game does it. So if I bring up his face, the animation itself is relatively simple. His legs don't really move. His face looks down quickly, jumps, places the block. Very, very reminiscent of the game. I promise I did not look at any reference. I'm just a fucking nerd. He jumps up again, places the block, looks over. I really, really wanted to capture the way you have to, like, force your head in the game to the side to make your camera move. So when Steve moves his body, his head turns first. So his head, like in game, would turn to the point he wants to look at. And once his head is done turning, his body stops turning with it. So there's a bit of a delay between when his head starts moving and the point where his body starts moving. So his body doesn't start moving until frame 3 of him moving his head. And he doesn't really move his body after that. And the effect where his head clips into his body is 100% intentional. It looks just like that in game. He looks line of sight to every single block placement point. And he looks up, places the block, stays looking at the top of the block because, it's still there. Places the block, looks down a little bit again, and then he pulls out Minecraft and looks at the camera. At this point, it's kind of simple. You just make the key points. It's not hard, per se. It's just, you need experience with 3D. You don't need experience with 3D, but it's nice to have experience with 3D. I have a lot of experience with 3D, so it makes it really easy to be able to go, oh, orientation X, down. Made Steve sad. Orientation Z, let's turn him. Oh, wow. You just grab his face, do whatever you want with it, orientation-wise, looking up, and then you make a key point, key frame, and you keep going, frame by frame by frame by frame. You can ease in, ease out, etc. Verse 2 has slightly less 3D effects. There's no rig here. Steve is just a puppet made of PNGs, still controlled by a bunch of PNGs. But I learned my lesson from the first one, and I made his controller a blank PNG. So I exported nothing on the canvas from Google Drawings to make his control point. And, that's his control point. So if we invert the selection and we hide everything, his control point still is blank. Toggling it on and off is not going to make it visible. Nothing will. The control point itself is blank, so it doesn't mess with the animation. Again, this is very, very heavy on the CPU. I mean, it's taking the time to render all the layers, and it is not having a good time. Trying to select all of them is worse. So as you can see here, we've got Steve on this quote-unquote 3D plane. The effect is created by stacking PNGs on top of each other. I really didn't want to make full 3D. I couldn't make 3D models because it wouldn't allow me to do so because Adobe Animate just would not link up with it. I tried importing 3D models. That was the first try, and it didn't want to. So I said, screw it, I'll make my own Steve in After Effects, and that's what I did. And here we have the parent layers, again, controlling everything. So each of these colors corresponds to a different letter in the set. So like this, not letter, but object. Steve here is just a puppet. Everything is controlled by Steve Blank, and the rest of his rig is linked to Steve Blank, except for the block being linked to his arm. You can see his legs bob back and forth like they would in game, and it's all 2D. Steve is a very easy character to 3D with, especially because, like, primarily because he's all block faces. You can just export PNGs of textures and go, oh yeah, that's Steve, and put them on a flat plane and make the character. So, you know, I made Steve here flat because it was easy, and the perspective is really easy to get down with a flat character. He's sneaking here, so he gets to the edge of the block, and he's looking kind of down. And in the front view, it looks like he's sort of looking down at the floor, but when you sneak in game, your view stays up here where the head would be. It doesn't go down. So he's still looking like down like this-ish. And he places the block on the edge of the block and keeps walking. This is straightforward, so there's no perspective here. But what this does is it takes the letter PNGs I made, like these, and it takes the gray PNGs I made of the letters, and it makes them into a pseudo block, like a letter block. And you layer these back to back to back to back to back, and suddenly you have 3D blocks. You have like a very well done 3D effect where he's sneaking on the edge of the block and he's quote unquote placing the blocks. They're popping into existence and they're sliding away and they're going to the beat. You've got these layers making it look like it's actually 3D. The only thing with really heavy movement, like look at all these layers. After Effects does not like these. It doesn't have groups. It doesn't have layer groups. It doesn't have folders. Only in the materials list does it have folders. It doesn't have folders in these. It doesn't have groups. The only thing you can do for organization is layer color, which I did. It's a lot. After Effects does not like this many layers. There's 122 here, and even when they're all hidden, it still struggles. Gets to the end of this, and it zooms out, and you've got a convincing 3D effect. Although slightly blocky, but, you know, that's what Minecraft is. I'm not sure what happened to the E there. The E is a mystery. Very convincing 3D effect. And yeah. It's really just that simple. Just make layers and you've got a convincing 3D effect.